Hi everybody. Hello and welcome back again. Hi, welcome back again. We had a little break and welcome back to the conversations on decoloniality and fashion, organized by the Research Collective for Decoloniality and Fashion. And I think for recording purposes, my name is Erica Krief, and together with Angela Janssen, we're going to be convening tonight's conversation. And the aim of this is really to experiment with alternative knowledges, and through communal conversations and interdisciplinary engagement, we invite you to join in listening and then join in conversation. If we could just remind ourselves to be respectful of each other's feelings and welcome compassion, empathy, and consideration to our collective and individual. And then our quote from today, from our reading, learning to unlearn in order to relearn. So for the session, we're really going to start with 30 minutes. To start with, we've got a very exciting guest in the room. And after the 30 minutes, we'll break out into a group discussion and the recording will be stopped. So for this session, we're very excited to welcome Walter again, one of the authors of Learning to Unlearn, Decolonial Reflections from Eurasia and Americas, published in 2012. Medina would have loved to join, but she sent her apologies as she's literally traveling as we speak, so she cannot join in person. In the book, Walter and Medina invited a shift in the geo and body politics of knowledge from studying the other toward the thinking other, and addressed areas as diverse as philosophy and higher education and gender and citizenship and human rights and indigenous agency, but also provided examples of decolonial thinking, education, and art. And so Walter Mignolo, and I'm going to just do a short introduction, is a distinguished professor of Romance Studies at Duke University. His research and teaching have been devoted in past 30 years to understanding and unraveling the historical foundation of the modern colonial world system and imaginary since 1500. In his research, the modern colonial world system and imaginary is tantamount with historical foundation of Western civilization and its expansion around the globe. Medina Sostlanova is a trans-diasporic feminist thinker and fiction writer and a professor of post-colonial feminisms at the Department of Thematic Studies and Gender Studies at Linköping University in Sweden. And she's involved in many projects inside and outside of academia related to political art, decolonizing universities and museums, feminisms, and the global South. And then Medina wanted to share with us some decolonial fashion through it. It's Medina Sarup, a Circassian designer who not only works with authentic Circassian dress, but also attempts to use its elements in her contemporary collections. So before we start tonight's session, Angela, would you play the video? Just a little introduction. Thank you, Angela. We might come back to that in a little while in the conversation. So I'm wondering, Angela, maybe you want to start with your question that just to kind of begin this conversation tonight.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Erica, and hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much again, Walter, for joining us, for your continuous support to help us, lead us, guide us in figuring out how decoloniality and fashioning, body fashioning, can interact and meet. So I really am a very big admirer of your book, Learning to Unlearn. I think it's probably the hardest part when you start thinking about decoloniality is the unlearning. It's probably much more important than the learning, I think, or at least in my stage, in the stage of development that I am in. And so, yeah, for today or for this evening, in my case, for this evening, I wanted to kind of like address the case study that you present together with Medina in the appendix. So, and I've been really trying to pronounce it well, but so it's the case study of Amautai Wasi, which is an intercultural university project in Ecuador, born from the idea that indigenous people need to have their own educational institutions to reclaim their epistemic rights. So you explain, for example, on page 226 and 27, that how Amautai Wasi is not a return to the past, which is often, I think, a misunderstanding when we talk about decoloniality or decolonizing, because such a return is simply impossible. And that goes probably for most cases. But so rather than that Amautasi, rather than a return to the past, it emerged at the confluence and entanglement of political and cosmological ways of thinking and doing, of being in the world in the Andes on the one hand and in Europe on the other. So Amautai Wasi intends to appropriate and subsume whatever can be appropriated and subsumed into their needs, vision, philosophy, and way of life from the Western archives and contribution to human civilization. So whereby submission does not mean replacing, but rather that the present articulation of indigenous cosmologies in the future will coexist with Euro and American cosmology in their diversity. So because we are living in a world built and dominated by Western institutions, actors, and categories of thought, Amautai Wasi is neither an adaptation of Western university structure, nor a return to the education of the Incarnate. The main aim is to remain indigenous, to reclaim indigenous epistemic rights, because rather than waiting for a future to be made for them by colonial programs, and especially through development programs, this is their way to take control of their future. So I kind of would like to invite you, Walter, to take us or to think through with us how the example of Amautai Wasi could inspire locally initiated and conceptualized fashioning programs, how they could be an important tool in reclaiming local fashioning histories, craftsmanship, and futures especially, and how to negotiate that balance between what Rolando Vasquez, for example, calls the vortex of modernity that destroys everything in its path, and in this case, in the shape of contemporary fashion and the dominant system, especially, on one hand, and then local fashioning systems, on the other hand, based on community, local economies, erased histories, and traditions. So I think by far that is the biggest challenge when reclaiming these epistemic rights, or in this case, histories or knowledges, how to find that balance, right? There's no such a thing as going back before, but then how to negotiate that ever devastating power of the dominant contemporary fashion system?
Well, there is quite an agenda. But I don't know. I mean, while Eric and you were talking, I mean, I was thinking of so many places to start, and I changed it about 6 or 7 times. At the beginning, I was thinking how Medina and I came into this kind of idea. I mean, we were discussing it, of course. It was not just one day we decided. We were discussing this, and one day decided to. But why do we were discussing learning to unlearn? And it came from our personal experience, and that is where we start now from Decoloniality. We don't start from theory. We start from our personal experience. What kind of bother us, or what enthusiasm us, or what kind of move us. And so she is a Circassian, educated in Moscow. So educated in a state university. State university is very westernized university. But the family, the mother from Uzbekistan, the father from Caucasus. So she grew up into that kind of culture, the kind of Circassian and Muslim, etc. No? And then comes modernity. I mean, the modern education. But modernity doesn't destroy everything. Destitute. Because what is destroyed is gone. But what has been destituted and not killed, not destroyed, have the energy of living. So in the case of Circassian people, or in the case of indigenous people, yeah, especially the civilization of the New World, they were dismantled. But their languages, their knowledge always survived their community. The IU, the organization of the community, was always there. And by the 70s, began this kind of awareness, not awareness, but kind of, a lot of things were happening in the 70s, but kind of they come and say, well, we have to start fighting for our linguistic rights, for our cultural rights. And by the 80s, they say, well, if we don't control our own knowledge, will be Western knowledge that will talk about us, tell the narrator, tell who we are, etc., etc. So they came with the idea of creating a pluriversity, not the university. And as you said, the pluriversity is nothing. There is kind of border gnosis, border thinking, border living, in the sense that they take the concept of university, but change it to pluriversity. They take the idea of higher education, but they do it according to their need, and we explained that in the. So they make their own organization of their own curriculum. Forget about Western University and curriculum. And so the university, the pluriversity, Amautaiwasi, is modeled on the structure of the Tawantinsuyo, the 4 suyos of the Inca organization, which was not an empire, it was an Incanate, because the Inca didn't have empire, the Roman did. If you said that the Incas had an empire, you say, well, the Roman is an Incanate. So the Western will be offended if you call the emperor an Inca, right? So the model was the Southern Cross. the model for the incarnate and the model for the four of the four kind of domain of the Amautaiwasi. So what does Amautaiwasi mean? Amauta was a person of wisdom, generally a man, but also women. So Amautai means wisdom, or the knowledge of the wise person. And Wasi means house of wisdom. And if you go into a lot of other kind of languages, before the kind of the juggernaut of the university, modern university emerged, you will see that every civilization we know have a house of knowledge. They were not primitive, they were not barbarian, and they were not idiot, right? So then come the university, the modern university, and replace it. And what we are seeing now is the reconstitution of what modernity destitute. And that is border, you are aware that you dwell in the border of what your people knew through tradition, your ancestor, your languages, your system of belief, etc. And you have this kind of modernity over your shoulder. So you have to work with, but as you say, it's not to imitate, not to copy Europe, it's to steal whatever is useful to reconstitute what we need. In this case, reconstitute our knowledge for our needs. So I said about Madina that she's a Cherkess and educated in Moscow. And I am an immigrant Italian in Argentina. I don't have any kind of indigenous, I'm pure blood Italian, my family. But in South America, we have been living, traditionally, we have been living with indigenous people and Afro descent. So you become aware of that. And you become aware that in South America, I am a privilege, even if my family is a kind of proletarian, poor economically family, but as a white person, I have privilege over indigenous and black. So I become aware of that. But in relation to Europe, I am an Indian, right? And in relation to the United States, I am Latino, right? It's kind of... so that's a kind of my experience of dwelling in the border, different from that of Medina. But so we call the book, the subtitle is Decolonial Reflection from Eurasia and the Americas. So, and we didn't do by reading Kant or Heidegger or Aristotle or Plato. We did it, in my case, with Amautaiwasi, and in the case of Medina, yes, Amautaiwasi, but more with her own kind of knowledge, language, tradition, memory, embodiment. So, CCD, as the French will say, how we came into this kind of reflection, which I don't know, Medina didn't. I'm sorry that she's not here because I mean, it would be nice to talk with her about what happened to her with these ideas. But for me, since then, is the first sentence I pronounced in my undergraduate and graduate seminar. This seminar is about learning to unlearn. And I am not teaching, you are learning. So the question is not that I have to tell them all of this. I mean, in the first two classes, I do the big scheme. But then they have to start finding out their own kind of bio biography. So how have been located in the colonial metric of power, sexually, racially, nationally, religion, because there are always people, not just Anglo, but from different parts of the world, different families. They come from different parts of the world, or the family was immigrant many years ago. So, for example, a Chinese student undergraduate last year, he rediscovered the importance of Mandarin. That the kind of the education in the United States have been blocked. Another student he was in biology, so he had to cross the Sarak Duke Garden, which are beautiful gardens in Duke, from his dorm to the university. He had to cross the Sarak Duke Garden. And so we were talking about Amautaiwasi. Amautaiwasi is just not knowledge, rational knowledge. It's the relation of your body with the cosmos, with Earth, with everything. So one day he sent me a message, said, Dr. Mignolo, I don't cross the Saragut Duke Park anymore with my kind of radio, listening to music. I am listening to the birds. I am listening to the sound of the trees, etc. So that's kind of learning to unlearn. And that is kind of difficult because, especially for kids of 20, 21, you have to be in the music, you have to be connected. Or if you're a Chinese family, well, no, you have to kind of make it, you have to be successful. I don't know what's going to happen with them, but they become aware. That is now is their responsibility to, but it's not me that told them what to do. I kind of offer them, and the undergraduate, we just don't work with 5% of the bibliography is anthropology or philosophy to kind of give in a scheme, but the rest is all kind of text and videos. Now, fortunately, we have all this kind of materials. So they kind of get in connection with the voices and the projects and the problems and the concerns and the way they kind of, the indigenous people think. And undergraduates, they are kind of course, more sophisticated, but at the same time, for example, graduate students, she's from Tunisia, she's in Roman studies, and she came to the seminar 2 years ago. Now I am in her dissertation committee, but not just that. She's in Tunisia now, and she sent me a reflection in French. A reflection in French reflecting on her own kind of blockage of Berber and Arabic culture because she belonged to a French family, etc., etc. So the kind of discovery. So there is no rule. The question is what we learn from Amautaiwasi is learning to unlearn. We have to unlearn Aristotle. Doesn't mean that we don't have to read Aristotle. It means that we cannot read Aristotle in the way we have reading it, if we need to read it, or Kant, or Marx, or whomever you would like to. So the question is that for how fashion can be inspired. Well, that's up to you. That's up to you. I am telling you how this kind of idea come to Medina and myself, who were kind of questioning coloniality, the coloniality of knowledge, the coloniality of university, the coloniality of education. And we realized that we cannot address that decolonially just remaining within the universe of modernity. We have to step out. Even if that stepping out is not my own languages in the case of Quechua or my own culture, but Greek is not my language and my culture, and why I have to kind of learn Greek and Latin, and then French and German I refuse to to learn, but they have to learn French and Latin and a little bit of Greek and English, etc. Well, I'm not French. I'm not German. I'm not British. So that is all the question that you have to ask yourself and respond yourself. So we always say,
Oh, we're losing Walter. Let's hope he comes back.
I think it's such an interesting space that, yeah, I think maybe just see if he does come back into the room. We are about 30 minutes, so we could stop the recording.
Yeah, shall I do that?
Mm.
Sorry for the people at home.